David Brooks, 1990, in Texas. He got up on the platform and he delivered a world championship speech. And that set his trajectory on a path that I think some of us would also like to emulate. However, in our meeting tonight, his plan is not just to inspire you. If he does, that's great. That's perfect. But the primary purpose of his message this afternoon or this evening is to give us information as Toastmasters that can help us all go to the next level. So I hope that you will give great attention and really enjoy the time that we have tonight. And so without any further ado, I introduce Mr. David Brooks. David?
Hey, how are you? Can you see me or hear me?
We can hear you.
But you can't see me. So let me.
I'll move my mouth and you talk.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Start video. You know, I'm not that attuned to Zoom. I don't have a job that requires me to have to be doing all these things all the time. So I'm sorry if there's any technological glitches here. So how is everybody in Iowa?
Now we can see you.
Perfect. Good.
Great. Doing great in Iowa.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Is there anybody here that is from Mason City? No? Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. I was going to say that, you know, one of these days I'm going to drop in on you.
Actually, I am in Mason City.
Well, there you go. So, I hope you know, Mason City is River City in The Music Man. And one of my favorite movies, if not musicals, of all time. And one of these days, I want to come there and just walk around Mason City just to say, yeah, I know what this is like.
Well, added coincidence, I'm from Gary, Indiana.
Oh, Gary, Indiana.
I know. I hate that song.
I know. That's funny. Nevertheless, I'm just delighted to be back up there in District 19 rather. I've been there. I think the last time that I was there was in, I believe, 2017. Were any of you by any chance there at that time? I don't think so. Okay, well, let's proceed. You know, that's good because that means I don't have to break out the new material. So that's a plus. I am eager to share with you information that I think will help you to be better speakers tomorrow or tonight. I've probably listened over the years to 1,000 or more keynote addresses. And to be honest with you, I can't remember a single one of them. And that's because the typical keynote speaker will shout platitudes and aphorisms and pseudo motivation, and an hour or two after you've heard it, you have forgotten it. And that's what's happened to me. So as a result, I want to be able to share with you 6 strategies that will make you, allow you to be a better speaker as of tonight. So if you don't mind me getting off of the screen here, I'm going to open up my PowerPoint show and I will talk you through this. If there is a webmaster that it can handle the chat comments, I won't be able to see them while this screen is up, but I will be glad to answer questions after the fact. So I'm going to go about 30 minutes. I have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So go ahead and send in your information or your questions via chat, and I will respond to them after I finish with that presentation. If everybody's okay with that, let's go to share screen. Let's go to here, and here we are. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So if everybody can see that, then
You're not in presentation mode there.
what is that mode that I need to be in?
You go up to, where is it?
Yeah, where
You
is
could do F12, I think, or what's
F12?
the thing?
Five.
I think that might do it.
F5.
Right.
F5.
F5 maybe.
Yeah.
F5.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Okay, so
Five.
F5. Well, let's try that one too. There we go.
There
How's
we
that?
go.
There it is.
That's
Better?
wonderful.
All right, good deal. Sorry again for the technological challenges here, but it's just one of those things that I'm not that accustomed to doing this kind of a presentation on this format. So, as you see here, I won the Toastmasters World Championship in 1990. Can I ask how many of you were actually members in 1990? No one?
I was. Dave.
Oh, okay. So there was one. Let me put it this way. How many of you were actually alive in 1990?
Alive, yeah.
Better question.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm fully aware that right now that I could be speaking to people that were not born when I won, and I just don't want you to tell me about that. So, anyway, let's move on. I will show you, in case my name, by any chance, since only one of you apparently were there when I was in Ames in 2017. Let me explain to you just a little bit about who I am and who I am not. You might have seen some twill slacks from Talbots, in which the fashion designer is David Brooks. Well, guess what? That's not me. I spoke in Jamaica and I told them that my name was confused with a number of other David Brookses, and they went, no problem, man, we'll put together a beautiful brochure for you, and this is it. It was Hybrid Events presents a night with David Brooks. And there you go. that guy is also a David Brooks, but that's not me. And as for this next one, I'm going to have to let you decide. Hopefully you understand this is also not me. I am instead the David Brooks that you can find at dbrooks@texas.net. And if I say anything tonight that makes you want to follow up with me, use this email address, dbrooks@texas.net. And that's where you can find me, and I'll be glad to answer whatever questions that I have. One other point about who I'm not. If you look at this as the opening program of a district in Wisconsin that a couple of years ago had me up there. And if you'll look down in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that they posted me as the 1900 world champion of public speaking. And they were so embarrassed when they presented the program to me. They said, we're so sorry, we're so sorry. And I said, are you kidding? This is a gift. This is a great thing to have. I can use this forever. So I opened the program that day by saying, yes, when Ralph Smedley and I were little boys, he dreamed of creating an organization for speakers, and I dreamed of being the world champion. So that also, again, not me. If you want to see a copy of my world championship speech, you can go to, that is, just email me and I will send you a copy of the speech. This is it. This page right here is the full speech that I gave. A 7-minute speech, actually 7 minutes and 13 seconds. And I did it 30 years ago. And it has allowed me to travel the world. So don't ever say that you can't say something memorable or significant in 7 minutes, because I did. And it has resonated for the last 30 years. If any of you would like to see one example from the speech, this is it. This is only a 1-minute clip. And if you will, just watch this and see what I mean about having a vision for the future.
But then something happened and everything changed. I grew up. And as I learned to separate fantasy from fact, I learned a terrifying truth. I learned that the heroes of a modern world were but mere mortals. And oh, what fools these mortals be. Why, in just the last 3 years, we've seen an Olympic athlete stripped of his gold medals because he used drugs. We've seen not one but 2 television ministers fall from grace. We've seen billionaires bankrupted by greed. And we've seen Donald Trump be Donald Trump. Honor, integrity, self-respect. It seemed we'd left them all behind. Until last year. And once again, I saw it on television. June 3rd, 1989, Beijing.
So that was literally 30 years ago. And you may be wondering, how did he know about what was going to happen 30 years or 26 years later? The fact is, I envisioned writing that speech to have a lifespan of 10 years. I thought it would be about memorable, that is noticeable and findable for around 10 years. Come to find out, it's now 30 years, and I've been able to reap the benefits of that vision ever since. Let's go into the quick presentation, and this is not going to be long, and I'll have plenty of time for Q&A. I want you to remember, anytime that you stand in front of an audience, that the audience is not the enemy. Now, a lot of people tell me, oh, I don't want to speak because I'm afraid that the audience will hate me. I'm afraid that they will laugh at me. I'm afraid that they will be not my friend. And I contend that is not the case. In every case that I've ever experienced, the audience comes into the room wanting you to be good. That's what they want. They want you to be good. They don't want you to fail. They want you to succeed. So if you approach the audience with the concept, they're on my side at the start, as long as I don't do something to lose them, then they will be with me at the end. I contend that you should always look at an audience with the expectation that you will find friendly faces. Friendly faces are the ones that will be people that are nodding in agreement, that are smiling, that are laughing, that are participating. They're the ones that you want to play to in the times in which something does not work. And it will happen every time there is something that will not work. And if you can turn back to the friendly face, just like turning back to look at your mom and she says, oh, that's okay, everything's fine, don't worry. Then you will be able to approach the audience with appropriate respect. Point number 2, determine what you want the audience to think, feel, or do. Now, you may think this is common sense, and yes, it is, but it is not common practice, because most speakers get up and they say, oh, I know my material, so I'm just simply going to get up and wing it. Have any of you ever said, I'm just going to wing it? Did you wing it well? Well, most people cannot, and I cannot. And I contend that the best preparation before standing in front of an audience is writing your speech. More on that in just a moment. But determine what you want the audience to think, feel, or do. And it can be a choice of 4 items. It can be to inform, to persuade, to inspire, or to entertain. It can be 1, 2, 3, or 4, all of them, or none of them. That is all of them, but it must be at least one of them. If you cannot write on the back of a business card what you want the audience to think, feel, or do, then you're not ready to stand in front of that audience. Point number 3, I am a proponent of speech writing. I am a professional speech writer. I have a background in journalism. And I want you to at least give me the benefit of the doubt on this one point. Write your speech. And when I say speech, I mean anything up to about a 1 hour presentation. So a 7-minute speech, a 15 minutes, a 30 or 60-minute speech. I contend you should write your speech word for word. Now, a lot of people disagree. A lot of people say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. I was told that you should never write your speech, and I will never write my speech. Well, I contend that you should for these reasons. It's because writing your speech facilitates economy and precision. Economy is using the fewest words, and precision is using the best words. So if you have the combination of economy and precision, then you will more likely be listened to, understood, and remembered. What are the 2 most famous speeches in American history? Can anybody chime in on that? The 2 most famous speeches in American history. Anybody?
Gettysburg Address.
Yep. Gettysburg Address, yes. And what about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream? In both cases, they were the result of exceptional writing. The Gettysburg Address was delivered by Abraham Lincoln on November the 19th, 1863. Now that date is significant because November the 19th is actually my birthday, not the 1863 part. But I always take pride in the fact that on my birthday, I think about the Gettysburg Address. Have any of you ever heard the Gettysburg Address? Anybody? No one. Okay, well, you're about to get to hear a recorded version. This is not obviously the original version. This is the version that is recorded by the author David McCullough, and his musical background is the Boston Pops. So I will click through these slides and have you read as you listen.
It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
You may have noticed that different track. You may have noticed that some of the words were yellow and some were white. What is different? What was unique to the white words? The words that were in white. Do you notice any pattern? Anyone?
Passive.
Passive? No. What about the length? What about the length of the words?
Short.
They were all short. They were all a single syllable. This is what's fascinating to me about the Gettysburg Address, that it was 268 words total. You see the white words, you see the yellow. 189 of the white words, 189 of the 268 are a single syllable. And that's difficult to write. That's not an easy process, because most people, when they sit down in front of a computer, they say, well, how can I dress it up? And Lincoln, and I recommend you follow his advice, recommended stripping it down. How can you make it simpler? How can you make it easier to understand? How can you keep the audience following you with simple, single syllable words? And he did. The Gettysburg Address has a 27.1 words per sentence. That's average. Now, today's business practice says that you should speak on an average of, that is, speak or write on an average of 10 to 12 words per sentence. So does that mean that Lincoln was wordy? No, it just means that he was speaking to a different audience at a different time. So 27.1 words per sentence makes this a more complicated speech than what you need to be considering. It has a readability index of 11.2. 11.2 means that an 11th grader could read and understand it. So that's what you need to know if you will use Microsoft Word. Now, I recommend Microsoft Word for this reason alone. They have a wonderful tool that is called Show Readability Statistics. I highly recommend that you go to Microsoft Word, enter Show Readability Statistics in your search bar, and it will tell you in your version how you should, how you can get to that spot. When you get to that spot, you will see a page that looks like this. It's up in the upper left-hand corner. You see it says Word Options. Now this, for example, down lower, here's a enlarged version. If you see this bottom check mark, that is when correcting speller and grammar in Word, you see the bottom box, Show Readability Statistics, is not automatically turned on. They just by default have it off. If you go in and you click that one box, then after that, anytime that you want to see what your readability stats are, as this, for example, is an example of the Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, then you will see a box that will pop up at the end that will tell you this. It'll show you the number of words. At 1,651 words, that means that, and I haven't mentioned this yet, average rate of speech in the US is 125 to 175 words per minute. You need to know what your rate is. But on average, 150 words per minute is what you should plan for. So this means that you could write, that is, you could read or recite this speech in just a tiny bit more than 10 minutes. If If you look down at the bottom, you'll see under readability where it says passive sentences. That's really questionable as far as its use. But the Flesch reading ease and the Flesch Kincaid grade level are important. You'll see that the 8.9 is the Flesch Kincaid grade level of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. And that's rather high because your average daily newspaper, assuming that there are still any in Iowa, there are precious few in Texas, I know, but the average daily newspaper writes for an 8th grade level. So this shows that at 8.9, it's only slightly higher than the average daily newspaper. Now, by comparison, the Gettysburg Address has an 11.2 readability level. So it was more complicated because the sentences were longer. Just by comparison, my World Championship speech had a readability level of 7, which is terrific because that meant that I knew I was not going to go over the audience's head. I knew that there would be at least half, if not more, of the people in the audience that would be with me and not be left behind. So that's what I recommend that you write. That's one reason why I recommend you write your speeches. Second reason that I recommend you write your speeches is that here are 6 words that can change the way you speak. And they are very simply this: make a point, tell a story. Now, this is a very simple point, and you may think, oh, that's easy, that's understandable, that's not difficult to grasp. I heard this from Bill Gove, a wonderful professional speaker, back in 1992. And he stood before the audience and said this: public speaking is simply make a point, tell a story. Make another point, tell another story. Make yet another point, tell yet another story. He said years after he will have given a speech, people will see him at a hotel or an airport. They'll come up and say, Bill, I still remember your story about, and they'll fill in the blank. And he'll laugh and he'll smile and he say, by any chance, do you remember what the point was? And they say, well, no, but I got the story. And he said, well, if you got the story, you got the point. This relates to point number 5, and that is there are 6 emotions that will connect with any audience. And these 6 emotions are happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, and fear. So happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, and fear. I read this in a newspaper trivia column where a man named Ellen Boyd said, every human being alive experiences happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, and fear. Well, the moment that I thought of these 6 words, I thought, well, that's great advice if you have a grand story, and then I thought of this movie. This movie actually came out only about 5 years ago. Anyone remember the movie Inside Out? Anyone seen it? Hopefully you have. Well, guess what? Meet the little voices inside your head: anger, fear, disgust, sadness, and joy. The only one of my 6 emotions that I've been teaching for 30 years that is not up here in the main characters of this movie is surprise. And frankly, it surprised me that surprise was not there. I read after the fact that the writers had surprise as one of the characters, but due to time, they had to cut that person out. So as a result, you have these 5, and then there's one more, surprise, that are universal emotions. I recommend that you start a story file. If you don't have a story file, I recommend that you keep one, start one and keep it, and file your stories by these 6 emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, or fear. anytime that something triggers happiness, I want you to jot it down on a note card and stick it in a folder. Or you can put it on your desktop if you wish. It doesn't matter, but just keep an example, that is, keep a reminder of what that is. Don't think, oh, I'll remember this, because everybody has said that. Have you ever been to a comedy club and you hear these great jokes and you think, oh, I can't wait until I can get back and tell my friends and coworkers these jokes, and the next day you can't remember a single one of them? Well, that's why I recommend you write these things down. So something that happens that triggers happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, or fear, just jot a note. It doesn't have to be the full story. I'm just saying jot a note and stick it in a folder. I have 6 folders in my file cabinets here beside me, and they're overflowing. Fortunately, the happiness and the surprise are the much biggest folders. They're the biggest folders. The sadness, anger, disgust, and fear, fortunately, are lesser in quantity. However, let me just explain how this works. I have now a 26-year-old son. His name is Matthew. When he was 4 years old, so yes, this story is 22 years old. When he was 4 years old, he wanted to start playing computer games. So I said, if you want to play the computer game, you have to learn to spell your name, because those games required them to log in. And every day for a while, he said, well, log in for me. And I did. And then one day I said, no, if you want to play this game, you have to spell your name. And his name is Matthew. So he learned to spell Matthew at age 4 by hunting and pecking on the computer keyboard. And he was away from the computer one day, and I said, well, spell your name for me. And he said, M-A-T-T-H-E-W, enter. Now that little story there triggers happiness and surprise. And that little story I have been using for 22 years, and it has never failed to get a laugh. Now, of course, in a Zoom setting, I can't tell that you're laughing. I can only assume you are. But I can tell you that I delivered this speech, a similar speech, in Sweden for a group of 650 Swedish engineers at Volvo. And when I gave that story, even they laughed. And I went, oh, if I can make Swedish engineers laugh with it, I know it will work for anyone. So that's one example. Let me give you another example. In 2002, my wife and son and I were traveling through the airport in Hilo, Hawaii. And this is only not even a full year after 9/11. And the TSA screener looked at me and looked at my son, who at that time was 7 years old. He looked at me, looked at my son, and he said, sir, I'm going to pat your son down for weapons. And I said, well, if you think that's important, if you think he looks like a terrorist, go ahead. And sadly, he did. So with that story, what of those 6 emotions are triggered there? Is there happiness? No. Is there sadness? Yes. Anger? You bet. Is there surprise? It was at the time. Is there disgust? Absolutely. And was there fear? Absolutely. Now, why would I tell those 2 stories, Matthew Enter and the Hilo, Hawaii airport story, back to back? It's because I showed you in approximately 2 minutes how I can take you on a roller coaster ride of all shared human emotions. Now, you have stories as good as these. Can you go out and tell the Matthew Enter story? No, because if you do, I will sue. Can you possibly go out and tell a story that is as good as that? Absolutely, you can. So that's the deal. Write your speech, write your emotions. When you see something that triggers happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, or fear, write them down. Then when you start to write a speech, you say, I need to move into this emotion. I need to move to this mood. then you can pull out your folder and say, oh, I can tell the story about the time that blank. That's what I recommend. You start a story file and maintain it as long as you write down the triggers: happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, and fear. And finally, the last point that I have time to make before I get to Q&A is don't underestimate the power of laughter. Now, if I ask for a show of hands in a room, I will say, how many of you like to hear a good joke? And almost all hands go up. Then I say, well, so how many of you can tell a good joke? And almost always the hands all go down. See, most people think I can't tell a joke, so I can't use humor. And I contend that is the wrong way of approaching it. I contend that you should never underestimate the power of laughter, because humor is a matter of attitude and observation. Here, for example, is a headline. I recreated this. I don't have the original. I didn't keep the originals when I first saw this. But this is a 3-line headline, and here are the first 2 lines that I have been using now since 1986. The headline read, 11 patients escaped from mental hospital. It was completed. Police recapture 13. Now, even this group of 650 Swedish engineers thought that was funny. So the point is that find what makes you laugh. This was happiness and surprise, and find a way to share it. So since that time, I have always torn out any headline or any article or any advertisement that I see that makes me laugh or smile. I tear them out. I keep them in a massive story file. And so I recommend that you do the same. Here's another example. Now today, because of cell phone technology, everyone is a photographer. Everyone is a photographer. So don't pass by things like this sign that I saw. I saw it, I had to go back with a camera and photograph this. Today, I would have snapped it just instantly and I would have had it. But still, don't forget to capture the images that amuse you. This is a restroom door of a community center, and it reads, restroom closed except for special events. Now, in an audience that usually gets a very loud reaction, and I say, well, wouldn't that, 1, be special? And 2, how many of you have seen things like this that you did not record and did not share? This is a great example of keeping your camera ready to serve you. Here's an example of a sign outside of a restaurant. It's the standard rolling sign, and it says dinner specials, turkey $4.35, chicken or beef $4.25, children $3. Again, made me laugh. All I did was find a way to share it. So in using humor, I say, find what makes you laugh and find a way to share it. And the one last example that I have before I get any Q&A here is this. I travel a lot. And one of the things when I go into a hotel, one of the quirks that I have is that I will, when I set down my bag on the side of the bed, I will look under the bed. Now, don't ask why. I'm just telling you, that's what I do. I just look under the bed. You'll be surprised if you do that, the kinds of things you'll find down there. Here, for example, is one thing that I found under the bed. It was a little brown card that reads, yes, it's true. We look here too. The house signed the housekeeping department. I have to admit, when I saw that, it scared me. And then I was worried about, well, I wonder when they look under the bed, and are they doing it in the middle of the night? So things like this you will find, and you just have to find a way to capture them, keep them, and share them. So that's the end of this presentation. Now I have time for a few minutes of Q&A. Who has something? Let me exit this. And who has something to ask?
Hi, David. It's me, the Dave that you talked to all day
Yeah,
today on
Dave
the the email. Hi, how are you?
Oh, doing great.
Thank you so
And by
much-
the way,
thank you so much for being here.
yeah, for those of you who don't know, Dave Spencer has done just a terrific job with the website as it relates to this program. And he's the person who put up the downloads that I supplied so that you can click on them and listen to about an hour of education. And he's the one who put all that up. And it was my pleasure to work with Dave on that.
Well, thank you so much for that, Dave. Yeah, there's 8 modules on there, and I encourage everybody to go and download. It's just a quick click. It'll download to your web browser, and then you can put it right into your computer. So what we did, and maybe we should have told you this ahead of time, because you didn't get some of the responses that you might have been hoping to get when you asked some of those questions. But in order to keep the audio and the video nice and clean, we decided that we might mute people's microphones. So
Okay.
we've been collecting some questions, some really good ones that have come in. And one of them was, over the last 30 years, what speaking techniques have you seen come out of and into vogue, or have things stayed pretty consistent?
In the last 30 years, I can tell you that in Toastmasters, the speaking styles have changed because of the use of humor. When I competed, I got, I think it was 15 laughs in 7 minutes, and that was huge at that time. I don't know the exact number, but when Darren LaCroix competed 11 years later, he got 30 or 40 laughs in the same 7 minutes. And so at that point is when the pendulum began to swing over to humor is going to be one of your best allies in Toastmasters contests or competitions. I have seen in recent years a lot more experimentation, a lot more innovation, perhaps. Now, I can tell you that I don't take credit for this. I'm just saying this is what happened. In 1990, I was going to give my speech in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I live in Austin now. But I thought, well, my goodness, I've got essentially home field advantage. You know, I'm going to speak to this audience that I know will be made up of at least a third of the audience will be local people. This is back when local people could come in for a $10 ticket and go into the contest. I knew at least a third of that room, and I assumed that it was going to be about 2,000 people. So I figured about 650 people or so would be from Dallas. And so I wrote this speech specifically to appeal to that audience. And I did 2 things that were unheard of and unprecedented at that time. First thing is, I am the only person to compete wearing blue jeans. Now, I wore a pair of Wranglers with a crease down the leg because that indicated formality. I wore a pair of blue jeans, and I wore what I call a Texas tuxedo. That is what is known as a Texas tuxedo with a tuxedo jacket, shirt, and a string tie and boots. And no, I did not wear a hat on stage. Then the second thing that I did that was unheard of was I was the first person to get an audience callback. That is a response. I asked for the audience to respond, and they were to respond back. And no one had ever done that in a Toastmasters contest until 1990. And in that case, I was speaking about the Lone Ranger. And I said, well, you know, before I even introduced his name, I said, let's see if you remember. And I said, I'm going to start a famous phrase, and I want you to remember, you to finish it. Are you ready? And people kind of going, I don't know if I'm ready for this or not. And I said, okay, here we go. Remember, we do things big down here, so I want them to hear you from Singapore to San Antonio. And I said, a fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty and the audience shouted, "Hi-yo, Silver," in such unity and power and passion that it was chilling in the room, absolutely chilling. People went, "Oh, wow, I never thought I would see that in a Toastmasters contest." So I just say, by the way, as I practiced that speech all summer before the August 18th contest, I would go to clubs and I would tell them, this is what I'm going to do. Now, I wouldn't be wearing the jeans and I wouldn't get the Hi-Yo Silver, except, well, I would ask for them to respond to the Hi-Yo Silver, but in many cases, the clubs that I was speaking to, it was maybe 9 people there. And so I figure that in any room, you can generally count on a third of the people will do anything you ask, a third will maybe come along with you if you're persuasive, and a third won't do anything that you ask. And so I figured, well, let's see, let's try this out in these small rooms. And I tried it out in rooms of 9, and I would get maybe 4 people that would respond. At the end of all of those evaluations, every single evaluation that I had, every one of them without exception, said, don't wear the jeans and don't do the Hi-Yo Silver. Every one of them was convinced that was going to be the ticket for losing. I accepted their advice. I did not use their advice. That is, I said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your input. And the whole time I'm telling myself internally, but I'm going to do it my way. I don't care if you like it or not, because I see the big picture. I'm on the big stage here instead of a room in the back of a restaurant with 9 people present. I said, I am envisioning 2,000 people present, 650 people that are at least from the Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico area. And I said, I know that I'm going to be able to get that response. So after I did the speech with the jeans, with the response, after I won, the minute that I won, everyone came up to me and said, everyone that had heard the speech before, everyone came up to me and said, I knew that was a good idea. Every single one of them said, oh yeah, I knew that would work. Well, no, they didn't. Or if they did, they sure didn't say it.
Yeah.
Mark Twain has a great quotation that a man with a new idea is a crank until the idea succeeds. And I proved him right.
There you go.
I would have been considered the biggest fool in the history of Toastmasters competitions if I had not won, but because I did, then suddenly I became a visionary.
Yep. And I don't know, based on, I mean, because I have watched that speech several times because I love to see the way that you presented it, what you did, all of the components that were part of that. And it was without a question masterful. And one of those was that Hi-Yo Silver, the way that you brought that audience into your speech. That was sweet. And in 1990, I'm sure that was quite an unusual thing. We've got about 4 minutes here, and there are a couple other questions that seem to be kind of along the same line.
And
it has to do with the memorizing. But then I remember when I was uploading your material that there was one of those segments that talked about memorizing or internalizing. Can you take just a couple of minutes and flesh that out? Because we have another question that we want to get to.
I'll condense it. So I want you to go and download that track where it says memorization or internalization. I contend that when I first started, I memorized my speeches and I was very stiff and awkward as a result. It wasn't until I heard this from Cavett Robert, who founded the National Speakers Association. He also was the 1942 Toastmasters World Champion of Public Speaking. So I had that in common with him. And he said, speakers should go through 3 phases of development. The first is concern about yourself. How do I look? How do I feel? How do I sound? And he said, that's where everyone starts, and that's where most people stay. He said, but after you get comfortable with how do I look, sound, and feel, he said, then you move to phase two. Phase two is my message clear and concise? As I mentioned in the writing your speech, is it precise? Is it succinct? Is it understandable and memorable? So that's phase two. And he said, that's where good speakers are. He said, but if you want to be a great speaker, you get past phase one and phase two, and you move to phase three, and that is concern about the audience. He said, that's the number one thing that you should do as a good speaker is to be concerned, is the audience getting it? That's one of the reasons why doing a presentation like this on Zoom is so difficult, because you don't know, you can't see. I see only 4 or 5 faces here, and I can't tell, except for Orville, anyway, and Dave, that are actually responding. Now there may be others. Oh, wait a minute, there's Matthew, but there are others that are probably responding. It's just that I don't get that feedback, and a good speaker needs that, because a good speaker is saying, you know what, I don't really care if I'm perfect. All I care about is, does the audience get something they can use?
Right. That whole idea of connection.
And that is one of the tracks. Yes, that's one of the tracks that I encourage you to download, because I think that it has a lot of value and it has more details than what I just gave.
Awesome. So, that is so cool. Now, Dana asked a question here, and I'm just going to kind of summarize it, but I think a lot of people have been wondering the same thing. And Dana said, when I get to writing my stuff down, I get tied up in that minutia of the words, and pretty soon I get kind of lost in the overall intent. And I know in the stuff that you sent, there were actually 2 parts of writing a speech. I don't know if that's included in those.
It's you will find it in there. You will find the answers if you download the 8 tracks. You'll find them. What I recommend is that you write your speech not so that you can memorize it, not so that you can agonize over it, but so that you can edit it for its most succinct form. If you edit your message down to the most succinct form, then you put it on paper and say, okay, fine, my word count is blank. If, for example, you're doing a 10-minute speech and you know your average rate of speech is 150 words a minute, then you know that I can cover 1,500 words in that time without going over time. So write your speech and then determine what you do, a word count, and say, well, wait a second, I've written 2,000. I've got to go ahead and cut about 1/3 of this. Or if you say I've only written 500, then you say, oh, well, look, I've got room for at least 3 times this. So you can estimate finishing on time by writing and doing a word count. Now, once you've written it and got a word count, then I recommend that you set it aside and you simply write on a 3x5 note card the 3 or 4 stories in your presentation. And all you need is a headline for each one. All I would have to do, for example, is put Matthew Enter and Hilo, Hawaii on a note card, and that would remind me the next story.
The story just becomes part of the natural progression then.
It should become organic. It should not be something that
and so you're not really memorizing all of the information. Right. You are going from one point to another with connectors and putting in stories that you already have a connection with.
Right. It's not every word in the right order, because, yeah, let's face it, that's reciting a poem that you did in elementary school. It's not every word in the exact order. It's every idea in the best order.
You know, David, I honestly believe that we could spend the whole rest of the evening just going back and forth with some questions and getting some of that deep, rich content that you can bring us. And me personally, I have absolutely enjoyed this more than you can possibly imagine. And I hope now that I have your email, then maybe I'll be knocking on your door.
Sure. Well, if any of you have any other questions that we did not get to cover, or if you need a clarification on any of the points that I did cover, email me, dbrooks@texas.net. I'll be glad to answer. You know, it's a pleasure to be a resource. And by the way, I just happened to notice as I moved over, look right beside me here over on the wall, that framed picture, if you can see it, is in fact, it's got the Lone Ranger's
The
mask.
Lone Ranger mask.
And it is a signed, autographed photo by Clayton Moore. One of my proudest possessions.
That is really awesome. David, thank you so much for spending time with us and bringing such incredible value to the District 19 Spring Conference. Thank you. I mean, it just blows my mind that you were willing to share the content that you have worked all these years to create as something to pour into our district and our speakers. And for me personally, I will treasure that. And if there was any way that I could have you, you know, like autograph those MP3s, I would certainly ask you to do that.